Assalamu alaikum. This is a macroeconomic course directed to second year groups A, C, D, M, and R that takes some questions about the national income and the price level in the long run. First, state whether the following sentences are true or false. Number 1, starting from no gap, an expansionary aggregate demand shock will create a pressure for a rightward shift in SRS curve. This sentence is false because an expansionary aggregate demand shock would open an inflationary gap, and this inflationary gap, it means that the actual level of output is greater than the potential, which means that the demand for labor would be high, wages would increase. This would create a pressure for a leftward shift in SRAS curve. Thereby, a correction of this sentence would be, starting from no gap, an expansionary aggregate demand shock would create a pressure for a leftward shift in SRAS curve. Second, the short-run effect of an increase in aggregate demand is an increase in output and an increase in the price level. This sentence is true. When we have an expansionary aggregate demand shock, aggregate demand curve would shift rightward, causing price level to increase and aggregate level of output to increase. This is in the short run. Number 3, there is no difference between the equilibrium level of output in short run and that in long run. This sentence is false because in the short run, the equilibrium level of national income or the equilibrium level of output could be equals, less than, or greater than the potential level of output, while in the long run, the equilibrium level of output equals the potential level of output. Number 4, the short-run effect of aggregate demand shocks will cause a permanent change in equilibrium level of national income. This sentence is false because the short-run effect of aggregate demand shocks will cause a temporary, not permanent, a temporary change in the equilibrium level of output or the equilibrium level of national income. Number 5, the long-run effect of expansionary aggregate demand shocks will cause a temporary change in equilibrium level of national income. This sentence is false because the short-run effect of expansionary aggregate demand shocks will cause a temporary change in equilibrium level of national income, while the long-run effect of expansionary aggregate demand shocks will not cause any change in equilibrium level of national income. Number 6, the increase in aggregate demand in the long run does not affect the equilibrium level of output. This sentence is true. Any change in aggregate demand, whether an increase or decrease, in the long run, this will not affect the equilibrium level of output. The economy is producing the potential level of output in the long run, while in the short run there is a temporary impact on the equilibrium level of income or the equilibrium level of output. Second, given the graph below, answer the following questions. At the equilibrium level given by aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply, what is the type and the size of the gap? Second, how SRS is likely to shift to eliminate the gap. Draw the new equilibrium position. Third, in moving from the initial equilibrium to a new one, how have the national income and the prices changed? Let's solve these questions. At the equilibrium level given by aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply, we find that the actual level of output, which is 500 680 is lower than the potential level of output. عرفت ازاي ان 600 ده البوتنشال عشان vertical line. Here the actual level of national income, which is 580, is lower than the potential level of output, which is 600. In this case, we have a recessionary gap. The size of this gap would be the difference between the potential level of output and the actual level of output. So we have a recessionary gap. The size of this gap is a difference between 600 and 580, which is 20 units of output. Second, how SRS is likely to shift in order to eliminate the gap. First of all, أنا عندي هنا recessionary gap. Recessionary gap معناها the actual level of national income or the actual level of output is lower than the potential level of output, which means that the demand for labor would be low and wages would be low. In this case, when wages decrease, SRS would shift rightward in order to eliminate the gap. So the gap would be eliminated in the long run by shifting SRS rightward. Okay? In moving from the initial equilibrium to new one, in this case we find that احنا وصلنا للequilibrium level or the potential level of output at 600 but at a lower price. اوكي اللي احنا خدناه لحد دلوقتي ان انا عندي وضع معين في الايكونومي where the actual level of output is lower than the potential level of output. So we have a recessionary gap. Okay, حسبنا ال size of this gap هي ال difference between the potential and the actual. أعرف ازاي ال potential إن هو بيبقى vertical line خط رأسي كده يبقى ده ال potential. تمام. ال actual هو نتاج ال intersection between aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply. عندي recessionary gap and this gap is eliminated by applying ال automatic adjustment mechanism. طب عرفت ازاي ال automatic adjustment mechanism معناها ان ال economy would correct itself by itself وهي بتشتغل دايما على supply side طالما short run aggregate supply هو اللي اتحرك in order to remove this gap فاحنا عارفين ان الطريقة ديت اسمها automatic adjustment mechanism ان انا ما بخليش خالص ال government تتدخل تماما في الايكونومي وايه let the economy correct itself by itself. قلنا لما بيبقى عندي recessionary gap معناها ان انا بنتج فعليا اقل من البوتنشال. ده معناها ان الديماند for labor would be low, thereby the price of labor which is wages would decrease. لما ال price of wages decrease طبعا الفاكتور ده بيأثر على ال SRAS curve would shift rightward till the gap is eliminated. تمام. واحنا خدنا طبعا قبل كده ان recessionary gap لما انا بعتمد في in order to eliminate this gap بعتمد على automatic adjustment mechanism. طبعا هي بتاخد فترة زمنية طويلة long time period because wages are sticky in downward direction. Okay. طيب if you are asked that the government attempts to eliminate this gap. طب لو أنا دلوقتي اعتمدت على ال government intervention, what is the kind of policy the government would adopt in this case? We have a recessionary gap. In this case, the government would adopt expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, expansionary fiscal policy هتطبق ازاي؟ Either to increase government expenditure or to decrease taxes. هتأثر على أنو سايد؟ هتأثر على aggregate demand curve. Okay, aggregate demand curve would shift rightward in order to eliminate this gap. Okay, نقطة البداية عندي عند ال 580 والprice equal 1. Okay, the intersection between aggregate demand note and SRAS note. if we depend on the government in order to eliminate this gap, the government would adopt an expansionary fiscal policy by increasing government expenditures or decreasing taxes. Okay, this would cause rightward shift in aggregate demand curve till the gap is removed but at a higher price. لو قارنت ده بالautomatic adjustment mechanism هنلاحظ إن الجاب is removed but at a lower price.